Hey guys, I'm here to get into David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which he released in 1986. And yeah, this is perhaps just one of the greatest mystery films ever made. I mean, simply put, this film just come to me always at the right time. I first saw this when I was about 16 years old, and I didn't really understand it at first. I needed more drive for me to fully grasp David Lynch. And then I came back to Blue Velvet a second time, and I fell in love with what it's doing. It's just so freaking original, pretty ahead of its time. And strangely, it is more linear than most David Lynch films are, but it does operate on a unique kind of wavelength of where you're just looking at light and dark. Like I feel like I'm ultimately experiencing some really dark seediness, while I'm also experiencing a lot of light moments in between them, like but good-hearted, like where it's very philosophical and about kind of capturing this heartfelt balance. I don't know, it reminds me a lot of just like Kate Bush music, basically. David Lynch's take on a lot of that, the film, which ends up being almost just like, hey, I love that almost just dang even more because this is just so personal. And I feel like this whole character is just the character Kyle MacLachlan plays, Jeffrey Beaumont. Reminds me a bit of like a Dale Cooper, younger Dale Cooper, like perhaps a more Dale Cooper in a probably in a younger phase in his 20s. So you know what that means is like even the coolest people, it's like they get a little bit too sexually furious, and that's kind of something a lot of people have to go through in their 20s. And I watch this now, and I'm like, that is definitely like a young man's exploration on sexual. This is the coolest one I've ever seen. Like basically, he's like a harmless creep. Like he is. He's just incredibly curious, and he kind of interacts and handles these situations in a really fascinating way. Although he is very fascinated by seediness, but it's almost like pushing the bar to the extent of just how far, just the extent of small town boredom can drive a person to just do really warped things. I mean, and he really just gets way too far in over his head. This is just something that goes way too far. It's absolutely perfect the way this whole mystery unfolds. Very unpredictable and suspenseful. He just has like an overwhelming amount of naivete, but he just goes to this thing, and the thing is, no matter how bad it is, he still goes to it. So he's just kind of got almost something of a super force about him as a character himself. I feel like David Lynch portrays Comic Logman as something of him, a cool younger shade of himself in a lot of ways, and just a man who's just afraid of a lot of these terrible things, but maybe even more, he's fascinated by these terrible things because he kind of does experience kind of an awakening as a man throughout this. So that's what I noticed. Like he becomes more of a cool, like a bigger man at the end of all this, kind of having gone through it all. So it ends up being quite a positive film in its own strange way. It takes you through some of the awful stuff. So it's really like some stuff is awful as a Clockwork Orange, but then stuff is beautiful in the end. It's like, okay, well, facing evil and going through all kinds of just weird rendezvous, and strange rendezvous, dark, scary places, just kind of what happens when a sheltered person just goes way too far. There's always the limits that a sheltered person needs to have on themselves, and I feel like watching this film is a great exploration of that. I think David Lynch films in general are a perfect expression of just how, literally, lonely men, can find a way, creatively, any sort of hormonal frustration, as this film perfectly maps out and explores. And I think that's what I need a little age to grow on me. About this film. I think I was about 18 or 19 whenever I fell in love with it. Now, all of my 20s, this became increasingly like a life changing film to me. So it's like when those odd moods come around, I'm like, I've always just turned to film instead of a person to sort of ease up on a lot of this stuff. And I'll watch this, it's just like, whoa, it's just something really intense and very overwhelming all the same. There's just something real, like something here that just feels like it's easy for like the coolest people to become consumed by. Basically, it's like that point where you're over consumed by something where it's like, hey, he's got the buzz of love. No one knows what this guy's talking about, but he's so deep into it. Even like Sandy, played perfectly by Laura Dern. I love her character because she's just like the perfect side woman who's innocent and completely, and she's just kind of seeing this other innocent man become way too far into something dark. It's just perfect the way it plays out. Like, I don't know, this is quite a groundbreaking film. And again, it took me a little bit of growing up myself to grasp that, because I think that this film just had to be one of these. Like, I love how this is like the first David Lynch film to really reach a wide audience. Because this film was huge when it came out in 1986, and I feel like it certainly left a very remarkably strange impact on people. Because it's just like the balance of light and dark is just very organic, and it just feels like it's got a tone that is very reminiscent of like like Twin Peaks, early Twin Peaks rather, and it feels like we're getting a whole film of that very tone where everything's very charming and delightful, but also terrifying and unpredictable. I mean, Frank by Dennis Hopper is he's really too terrifying for words. He's literally like a personification of all evil, as well as his side. I mean, it just all feels like it's spooky, and it kind of goes evil beyond the realm of words, I would say. While meanwhile, the way he lands a lot of really darkly comedic quotes. Like, I mean, he's always on the dark comedy. This film is that's the best film of all time. It's just some rendezvous in a small town and going way too far. It's one of the biggest influences on me of all time. Honestly, this is gonna and that's what Jeffrey is. At the end of the day, he is like a wonderful man who is a creep, but he goes too far to it. As any man is a creep in their 20s, especially. But you grow and you find something else in your 30s. That's sort of what it comes down to. You're going to grow past a lot of the hormonal stage. Curiosity. If you're staying alone, or in a lot of ways, finding like this curiosity that just goes way too far. And again, you could say that there's something of a hell on earth living in this film. I mean, it's wildly. The mood shifts so very bipolar. You could say this is like a bipolar film. It feels bipolar, as it feels like it's very sweet in some moments, and then it's just downright horrifying in other scenes. It's just ultimately very surreal, and it's one of the best films ever made. And I feel like, again, it's not as weird as most David Lynch, and it is a weird film. Don't get me wrong. It's just like, but by David Lynch standards, I'm like, he will only get much weirder, honestly. And it's funny how, ironically, I think I needed something slightly weirder than this to get me into David Lynch, honestly, because it's like this is almost just like a very laid back. I don't know, a very grounded tale on something very overwhelming. And I mean, there's just something magical about the whole thing. It's just, it's hard to beat the charisma of these two leads, all these leads, Isabella Rossellini. I mean, or like the classic charm comic log on Laura Dern, and the classic evil of Dennis Hopper and Isabella Rossellini. It's just, it's so great. You got all these side characters like Dean Stockwell just doing all these, you just don't know what's going to happen. A little bit of Julie Cruz music coming in also. It's one of the most entertaining films ever made too. I mean, it's just one of those films I never get tired of watching it. I never get tired of the soundtrack. It's very grand. I don't know, it just puts you right into a world of mystery. That's what Paolo Daminti is kind of grace is with David Lynch's films. He just really gives the perfect sense of mystery and layers to deep depths to his films. Very layered soundtracks. It's rewatchable. I can just watch this film endlessly. I don't know. I never get tired of thinking about this film. It really is quite a perfect, just kind of like getting out of your system of just like, eternal things a person would want to express, but it's done in like a completely just cool way, honestly. Completely cool. It never feels too creepy to me. Like, I mean, I know some people might criticize Dennis Hopper as being too much, but it's supposed to be like an over the top expression of evil. But the thing is, it isn't. I mean, like Stanley Kubrick worshipped this film when it came out. I think Stanley Kubrick realized, a man came around who's just as perfect but has better humanism. I believe that. Lynch perfectly announces this perfect vision here. It's just so remarkable. It's a revelation of a film. I mean, there's just so much going on here about just being voyeuristic, and combining voyeurism with a lot of innocence. And it's just a film that's subconsciously resonant. That's what David Lynch is. He's the ultimate director that relates to your subconscious. And no one taps into the mind quite as well as David Lynch, because every single scene and layer in his films have a meaning and a reason there. It's not random like it often seems upon the first viewing. Like, he always has a reason for it. That's what makes him so timeless, because it always comes back better. His films are better with age. Like, it's something wildly ahead of the time when the man's operating. I mean, it's just, you could say this film is just like going through another world in your own town. That's the way I like to see a lot of this. And that's what keeps my spark of adventurism kind of having, feeling a little bit of the strangeness around you. Anything can happen. Let the stories run wild. It's just atmosphere throughout this whole film. Just beautiful cinematography. A lot of that a paranoid apartment kind of feeling. Small town. It's more small town, like moments in apartments. But it's not like isolated in an apartment, but rather you're isolated in this weird town that, you just like, the further you get in, the more awful things you're going to find out will traumatize you for life, and eventually it'll come to it'll spread around. So it's like, it's just a very unique and dramatic portrayal of a small town America. I love it, but it never feels too serious. All the same, it's interesting. It's just this is unclassable kind of film where it's just its own world entirely. It's just, oh man, this is just really a perfect David Lynch film. There's just so much ambience to this film. And I recommend it to anybody if you're up for this. So, I mean, I say really it's rated R for a good reason. So, I mean, if you're 16 or 17 or up, yes, definitely. Or if you've seen A Clockwork Orange and loved what it was doing. That's about all I got. Otherwise, I can't recommend it for too long. This is pretty dark, as most David Lynch is. It's pretty, pretty 17 and up of a guy overall. That's when I was getting into it, so I didn't get into it as much when I was younger. But I don't know. There's just, I think surrealism is just the best way of all time of exploring the sexual nature of people. I've always found that way more fun and exciting than the real life of it. That's the thing. no matter how pathetic that comes off to others. It's like you find the cool side of it through film, you know, and it's just like, okay, it can just be a cool thing and not a lame thing, but you know, it's all how you perceive all this. And, you know, it's just like, yeah, David Lynch is the man showing you how to walk that kind of thing. Just having a fear of a lot of sexual nature, because it wakes up weird stuff in a lot of creative people. So like just going through it in a surreal way kind of gets it out of your system without having to get out of your system. So surrealism is masterful at doing all this. Yeah, it's a strange world indeed. You know, it's one of the best films ever made. I mean, it really is just. It's pretty disturbing too. I mean, it's not on the same level of disturbing as like Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire, Tokyo's Return, but it's close. It's up there. Even Tokyo's Fire Walk Me Frozen involves it. So it's like it just ends up kind of being the David Lynch film that matches the ultimate contrast of popularity and kind of just singularity, you could say. Like it has a wide appeal to it, but it's also just got like it's really doing its own thing. Like it's really taking the feeling of like, I don't know, I feel like Vertigo, for example, just almost taking it further, evolving it, you know, in a lot of ways. You know, and that's the thing. It ends up just really being an all-time masterpiece from start to finish. There isn't a moment where it's boring or dull. It's always interesting in some kind of way. I don't know. That's what this is. It's just got a lot of suspense to it. You know, and Rear Window's another. It just reminds me a lot of those Hitchcock films. Rear Window, it also has a lot of Rear Window feeling to it. You know, it's a lot more. You know, I think Elephant Man's whenever David Lynch really became a full-on humanist, and I think here's when he was able to be a humanist and a surrealist. So it's like he literally combined his shades from Eraserhead and the Elephant Man into something that's just even better. You know, oh man, it's just a really nice atmosphere. That's depicted here. It's really relatable feeling, you know, and just like the boredom that you feel that you get. So you just have to build your own curiosity until it goes too far, way past the point where you kind of grow in the process. So. You know, it's just such a great film. It's quite perfect. David Lynch makes perfect films. You know, that's the thing. That's why he's the coolest director of all time. I mean, you know, he pretty much only makes perfect films outside of Dune in my mind. You know, he's a unique man. This is one unique film. And it's just a perfect film all around. I recommend this film to anybody who's up for R-rated or seen Clockwork Orange before. Yeah, that's Blue Velvet. Man, what a great film.